It was the 1960s, an era defined by rebellion, freedom, and the birth of rock and roll. Music wasn't just a sound, it was a lifestyle, a way to break free from the norms. The world was captivated by the electrifying energy of rock stars who seemed almost untouchable. They had it all: massive fan followings, sold-out concerts, and chart-topping hits. Fame wrapped them in a golden glow, and their names were etched in the hearts of millions. Imagine the thrill of standing on stage with thousands of screaming fans. The bright lights, the thundering applause, and the pure adrenaline of being a rock legend. It's almost impossible to think that someone who had such a powerful presence on stage could one day fade into complete obscurity. Yet, behind the iconic guitar riffs and soulful lyrics, many of these stars had something lurking in the shadows, something that no one could see coming. The truth is, their stories didn't always end on a high note. Beneath the shimmering image of stardom, many rock legends were silently battling personal demons. Their lives seemed like a perfect dream on the outside, but behind closed doors, it was a different reality. Money poured in fast and flowed out even faster. Unwise financial decisions, manipulative managers, and reckless lifestyles chipped away at their wealth without them even noticing. In the early days, fame felt infinite. They believed they would always be on top. The rush of success made them feel invincible. And why wouldn't it? They were the voices of a generation, changing the world with their music. But as the years passed, the weight of fame became harder to carry. Some started to lose their spark. Their records didn't sell as they used to, and the audience slowly drifted away, moving on to the next big thing. What must it feel like to once be adored by millions and then suddenly be forgotten? To go from being a rock god to just another face in the crowd. It's heartbreaking to think that those who shaped the very essence of rock and roll were now battling loneliness and financial ruin. Many couldn't grasp the sudden fall from grace. They had been on top of the world, and now, reality hit them harder than they could ever imagine. But they didn't just lose money. They lost themselves. Drugs and alcohol became an easy escape from the harshness of reality. The same wild energy that made them legends now pushed them towards self-destruction. Some tried to hold on to their glory by performing in small rundown clubs, hoping that the cheers and applause would make them feel whole again. But it wasn't the same. Why didn't anyone see it coming? Maybe people were too caught up in the myth of their stardom to notice the pain hiding beneath. Perhaps the legends themselves refused to admit that they needed help. Admitting that the world had moved on without them would mean accepting that their time was over. It's almost tragic to think that those who once made the world dance to their tunes were now struggling to survive. They spent their youth chasing dreams, but no one warned them about the price of fame, the loneliness, the financial ruin, and the heartbreak of being forgotten. Their stories are a haunting reminder that the rock and roll lifestyle came with more than just glory. It came with an unimaginable cost. As fans, we often see just one side of the story. We celebrate their success but rarely question their struggles. These rock legends of the 60s were more than just voices on a record. They were human beings with dreams, fears, and fragile hearts. The glitz and glamour couldn't shield them from the harsh reality that one day the music would stop. And when it did, they were left with nothing but memories of their past lives. The rise to stardom was swift and intoxicating. It made them feel like they could conquer anything. But fame doesn't last forever, and when it faded, it left behind a void that nothing could fill. These legends, once hailed as the kings and queens of rock, became forgotten souls who silently slipped into poverty. Their stories serve as a sobering lesson about the fleeting nature of fame and the importance of holding on to something real when the spotlight dims. What would they have done differently if they knew how it would all end? Maybe they would have made wiser financial choices or trusted fewer people with their money. Maybe they would have kept a part of themselves safe from the chaos. The truth is, no one really knows. All we can do is look back and wonder how it all slipped away so quickly. It quotes us a somber reflection on how rock and roll, a symbol of freedom and rebellion, ironically became a cage for those who lived it to the fullest. They became prisoners of their own fame, trapped in a world that once celebrated them but eventually forgot their names. It's a story that continues to haunt the music world, a painful reminder that being a legend doesn't always mean living like one. When rock legends of the 60s were at the peak of their fame, life seemed like a never-ending party. The lights were bright, the music was loud, and the crowds were wild. These stars had everything: money, luxury, and the admiration of millions. Mansions stretched across hillsides, filled with the finest furniture and decorated with golden records hanging proudly on the walls. Expensive cars lined their driveways, and designer clothes filled them. Their lives seemed perfect, untouched by the problems of the real world. The parties were legendary. Night after night, their homes would fill with celebrities, musicians, and high-profile guests. There were endless supplies of champagne, exotic foods, and music blasting until the early hours of the morning. It was a lifestyle that most people could only dream of. It seemed like the good times would last forever. When you are at the top of the world, it's hard to imagine ever coming down. But with all that luxury came a price, one that wasn't immediately clear. The money was flowing in fast, but it was also going out just as quickly. Lavish spending became the norm. Private jets for weekend trips, entire floors of hotels booked just for one night, and extravagant gifts given without a second thought. It didn't seem to matter back then. Money felt like it would never run out. Every concert brought in huge profits, and every album sold millions of copies. To them, the idea of saving money seemed pointless. Why save when there was always more coming in? But fame is unpredictable, and the music industry is unforgiving. For many of these rock stars, their rise to fame was so sudden that they didn't have time to understand how to manage their wealth. Financial advisors and managers promised to handle their money, but not all of them were trustworthy. Some took advantage of their lack of business knowledge, draining their accounts little by little without them even realizing it. Contracts were signed without reading the fine print, and bad investments were made in businesses that failed before they even began. Yet, the spending didn't stop. Luxury cars were replaced every year with newer models. Expensive jewelry was bought as if it was just another accessory. Mansions were purchased in multiple cities, even though they barely had time to live in them. For the rock legends of the 60s, money was a tool to show the world they had made it. They weren't just musicians, they were icons of success. The bigger the party, the more extravagant the lifestyle, the more they proved their status. But there was another side to this lifestyle, one that was carefully hidden behind closed doors. The pressure to stay relevant in the music industry was enormous. Every album had to be bigger and better than the last. Every concert had to sell out. The constant demand for perfection drove many of them to dangerous habits. Drugs and alcohol became a way to cope with the pressure. It wasn't just about having fun anymore, it became a necessity to get through each day. The costs of this lifestyle continued to add up. Rehab visits, legal battles, and medical expenses started to pile on. But the money was still going out just as fast. No one seemed to notice the cracks forming. After all, they were still rock stars, still playing for thousands of fans. The illusion of wealth and success was strong enough to hide the reality that was creeping up behind them. Friends and family often tried to warn them, but the truth was hard to accept. They had spent their lives living like royalty. Admitting that money was running out would mean accepting that the dream was fading. So they continued to spend, continued to party, and continued to live as if nothing had changed. As time went on, the crowds began to thin. New bands were taking over the airwaves, and the music that once defined a generation was being replaced. Album sales dropped, concerts didn't sell out like before, and the phone stopped ringing with offers. Slowly, the lavish parties stopped. The mansions grew quieter, and the expensive cars started to disappear. Some of them sold off their belongings, piece by piece, just to keep going a little while longer. It's hard to imagine how it must have felt to watch everything slip away, to go from being the center of attention to just another name in history. But the truth is, the lifestyle that once defined them was built on a foundation that couldn't last. When the money stopped coming in, the reality of their situation became painfully clear. They had lived for the moment, never thinking about the future, and now the future had arrived. Those golden records still hung on their walls, a reminder of what once was. The memories of wild parties and sold-out arenas remained, but they couldn't pay the bills. It became a haunting memory of a time when they were larger than life, before it all came crashing down. The life of luxury was gone, replaced with struggle and survival. And the world moved on, barely noticing the fall of the legends who once ruled the stage. Their stories serve as a powerful reminder that fame is temporary, and money, no matter how much, can disappear faster than it came. The lavish lifestyle of the 60s rock stars was a symbol of their success, but it was also the beginning of their downfall. They lived like kings, never imagining the day when it would all be gone. But that day came, and when it did, there was nothing left to hold on to, just memories of a life that seemed perfect from the outside, but was crumbling from within. It's easy to assume that rock stars, especially the legends of the 60s, had everything figured out. They were living the dream, right? Money, fame, adoring fans, and a life full of excitement and adventure. But behind all the glitz and glamour, something darker was brewing. While the world saw them as larger-than-life icons, many of these stars were secretly struggling with their finances, their personal lives, and the growing pressure of staying at the top. The truth is, most of them were completely unprepared for the whirlwind of fame and fortune that swept them up so quickly. When they first hit the scene, everything felt like a dream come true. Their music spoke to a generation, and it felt like they would be on top forever. Every song they released seemed to become an instant classic, and every concert felt like a victory. But no one ever told them that fame isn't always forever. And no one ever warned them about the harsh realities of managing money, especially when it's coming in fast and furious. At the beginning of their careers, many of these rock stars were young and naive. They were driven by their passion for music, not by an understanding of finances. The excitement of being in the spotlight was overwhelming, and they were often too focused on their next big hit to stop and think about how they were managing their wealth. They didn't know the value of saving or how to make smart financial decisions. There were also people around them who should have been guiding them, helping them stay on track. But as many rock stars later discovered, not everyone who enters their life has good intentions. Managers, agents, and even friends took advantage of their inexperience. These so-called trusted people often made poor business decisions, leaving the stars with little to show for the enormous amount of money they earned. Bad deals and dishonest contracts drained their bank accounts, and some were left with nothing after being promised the world. Meanwhile, the pressure to keep up with the ever-changing music industry was mounting. Being a rock star in the 60s wasn't just about making music, it was about constantly being in the public eye. The need to keep fans engaged was overwhelming. Every new album had to be better than the last. Every performance had to be more impressive. The public's attention span was short, and if you weren't delivering hits, you were quickly forgotten. The stress of staying relevant began to take a toll on many of these stars. The excitement of fame began to fade, replaced by anxiety and fear of losing it all. Some began to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol, believing it would help them cope with the pressure. Unfortunately for many, this would become a dangerous and destructive habit. What started as a way to relax or have fun soon became an escape from the overwhelming stress they were feeling. But the sad truth is that many didn't realize how bad things had gotten until it was too late. Their spending habits had become reckless. They were living in mansions they couldn't afford, driving cars that were way beyond their means, and surrounding themselves with people who didn't have their best interests at heart. Instead of saving or investing wisely, they continued to live like there was no end to their success. And then slowly but surely, the music industry started to change. The 60s came to an end, and with it, the golden age of rock and roll. New sounds and styles were emerging, and the music that had once dominated the airwaves was being replaced by the next big thing. The crowds that once filled arenas to see these legends were now turning their attention to newer, younger stars. As album sales began to drop and concert ticket sales started to slow, many of these rock stars found themselves in a dangerous situation. They had spent their money so recklessly that they couldn't keep up with the sudden decline in their income. This was when the true consequences of their earlier mistakes started to set in. The massive homes, the expensive cars, the luxury lifestyles, they were all slipping away. Some rock stars tried to hold on by making comebacks, but it wasn't enough. The public had moved on, and the music industry had moved forward. No one cared about their old hits anymore. For many, the realization came too late. They had spent years living in the fast lane, enjoying the thrill of fame, without thinking about what would happen once it all ended. They had failed to set aside money for the future, and now they were paying the price. The financial troubles that had once seemed so far away were now their reality. What was worse was that they had no one to turn to for help. The story of these rock legends is a painful reminder of how easy it is to get caught up in the illusion of fame and wealth. They thought their success would last forever, but it didn't. Their biggest mistake wasn't living a lavish lifestyle. It was failing to plan for the future. No one told them that fame is fleeting, and that it's important to take control of your finances while you still have the chance. The struggle of these stars is something that many people in the entertainment industry still face today. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of the moment, but it's important to remember that fame can disappear in an instant. The key to long-term success isn't just about living in the moment, it's about making smart decisions and securing your future before it's too late. Looking back at the lives of these rock legends, it's clear that many of them never saw the downfall coming. They were so focused on the thrill of fame that they never stopped to think about what would happen when the music stopped. But for those who survived, the lessons were clear. The key to lasting success isn't just about living for today, it's about planning for tomorrow. The downward spiral that many 60s rock stars found themselves in was something most people never saw coming. They had reached unimaginable heights, their music playing on every radio station, and their faces gracing the covers of every magazine. But as quickly as they rose to fame, they began to fall. The things that once brought them joy, like performing and making music, began to feel like a burden. Fame was no longer a gift, it had become a trap. The same people who had cheered for them were now moving on to new stars, and suddenly they were just another forgotten name. It's hard to imagine what it must have been like to go from the center of the world's attention to feeling completely invisible. In the early days, the crowds were massive, and the energy at their concerts was electric. Fans would scream their names, throw flowers on stage, and beg for a glimpse of the stars they adored. But that same crowd that once filled arenas soon started to shrink. New generations of music fans were discovering new artists, and the legends of the 60s were being replaced by younger faces with fresh sounds. What had once felt like immortality suddenly felt like an illusion. The transition from being adored to being forgotten is a painful one, and for these rock stars, it was devastating. Many of them had spent so much time living for the moment that they never realized how quickly their time could run out. Their personal lives, which had been filled with excitement and adventure, now felt empty. The loud music, the flashing lights, and the roaring crowds were all gone. In their place was silence and loneliness. The reality of fading fame hit harder than anything else. Some of these stars tried to hold on to their careers, clinging to their past success. They performed in smaller venues, hoping to recapture the magic of their glory days, but it was never the same. The crowds were smaller, and the excitement had faded. Some tried to reconnect with their old fans, but many had moved on. The music that had once defined a generation no longer had the same impact. The bright lights of the stage had dimmed, and the world they had once ruled was no longer interested. This was the harsh reality many of these rock legends had to face. Fame, no matter how big, could not last forever. The same success that had brought them to the top could now bring them crashing down. For many of them, the world that had once been their playground was now an unforgiving place. They had no choice but to adapt to their new, quieter lives, away from the stage that had once been their home. But adapting was not easy. The high-flying lifestyle they had grown accustomed to no longer fit into the reality of their declining fortunes. They had spent years living in luxury, surrounded by wealth and privilege. Now they found themselves struggling to make ends meet. Their once thriving careers had left them with nothing but fading memories and bills they couldn't pay. It's heartbreaking to think about how quickly it all unraveled. One moment, they were at the top of the world, and the next they were struggling to keep their heads above water. Some of these stars tried to turn to other forms of work, but the transition was not easy. The music industry was not kind to those who had been forgotten. The same people who once celebrated them now barely remembered their names. The rock stars who had once been gods on stage were now living in the shadows, trying to find ways to make a living, just like anyone else. But even though their time in the spotlight had passed, their legacy lived on. These stars had helped shape an entire era of music. Their songs had inspired generations of fans and musicians. The influence they had on the music world was undeniable. And yet, despite their impact, they found themselves alone in a world that no longer cared. It was a cruel irony. The world had moved on, but their music had not been forgotten. The pain of losing everything was more than just financial. It was emotional. Many of these stars had poured their hearts into their music, and when that music was no longer being celebrated, they felt as though they had lost a part of themselves. Their identities had been tied to their fame, and once that was gone, they were left with nothing but the echoes of their past success. Some of these stars could never come to terms with their fall from grace. They lived in denial, hoping that one day the world would remember them, and their music would once again be appreciated. But for most of them, that day never came. Their attempts to revive their careers were met with indifference. The fans had moved on, and so had the music industry. For some, the struggle to survive in a world that had forgotten them was too much. Drugs, alcohol, and depression became their only escape. The most heartbreaking part of this story is that many of these rock stars never had the chance to enjoy the wealth and success they had worked so hard to achieve. Instead of being able to retire comfortably, they found themselves fighting to survive. The same people who had once been their friends now avoided them, and the world that had once adored them no longer. They had given everything to them, only to be left with nothing when the music stopped. This part of their story is a reminder of the cruel nature of fame. It can be intoxicating, and it can be fleeting. The same fans who cheer for you can just as easily forget you. The world of music is always changing, and those who once ruled the stage can quickly be replaced by the next big thing. These rock stars were legends, but they were also human. They made mistakes, and those mistakes cost them everything. Their stories are a testament to the fragility of fame, and the importance of being prepared for the inevitable changes that come with it. Fame is not a permanent thing. It's a moment in time, and it can slip away as quickly as it came. The key to surviving the fall is learning how to adapt and take control of your future before it's too late. Imagine being on top of the world one day and facing complete isolation the next. The lives of these 60s rock legends were like a roller coaster. One moment they were soaring high, and the next they were falling hard. They had everything at one point: fame, money, and a place in history. But that didn't mean they were immune to the painful reality of their future. In fact, many of them fell harder than most could have ever imagined. When their star power began to fade, they didn't just lose their fans or the excitement of performing. They lost everything they had worked so hard for. The mansions, the expensive cars, and the glamorous parties, they were all part of a life that no longer existed. What happens when that world is suddenly taken away? What happens when the crowd stops cheering and the lights go out? For these rock stars, the fall from grace was often painful, isolating, and filled with regret. Many of these stars found themselves in a constant battle against time. The clock was ticking, and with each passing day it became harder to keep up with the life they had grown so accustomed to. They were no longer the faces plastered on magazine covers. They weren't selling out concerts or recording the top-charting hits that once defined their careers. Their music, once revolutionary, was now seen as a relic of the past. As the years went by, they struggled to make ends meet, and the sense of purpose they had once felt in their careers slowly faded into nothingness. It was incredibly difficult for many of these musicians to accept that the world had moved on. The new generation of artists was bringing fresh sounds, and their music, which had once spoken to millions, was now being replaced by something different. It wasn't just about their fading popularity, it was about their identity as musicians. For many, being a rock star wasn't just a job, it was who they were. When that identity was stripped away, they were left with a void that was impossible to fill. To cope with the loss of their identity, some turned to destructive habits. They resorted to drugs and alcohol, trying to numb the pain of their fading fame. Others isolated themselves, choosing to live in seclusion rather than face a world that no longer appreciated them. Some even tried to revive their careers, hoping for a comeback, but the music industry had changed and they were no longer relevant. The truth was hard to swallow. They had been forgotten, and there was no way to go back. In some ways, the fame they had once enjoyed was both a blessing and a curse. While it gave them wealth and power, it also made them vulnerable to the harsh realities that awaited when their time in the spotlight ended. The very lifestyle they had created, the constant parties, the endless flow of money, and the need to always be on top, was built on an unstable foundation. The industry, after all, is constantly evolving, and those who were once at the forefront were quickly replaced by the next big thing. This brutal truth was evident when many of these rock stars found themselves struggling financially. The money that had once seemed endless had now run out. They were living in the shadows of their former selves, trying to make a living in a world that had forgotten them. Some ended up working in small clubs, performing for audiences that had no idea who they were. Others turned to different forms of work, trying to stay afloat but constantly battling the feeling of being irrelevant. But what's truly heartbreaking is that many of them didn't know how to ask for help. They had spent years living in a bubble of fame and success, surrounded by people who told them they were invincible. When the bubble burst, they were left with nothing, no safety net, no backup plan, and no one to support them through the dark times. It's easy to see how quickly the world can turn its back on someone who was once on top. Many of these rock stars didn't have the tools or the knowledge to manage their money properly. They had spent years living in excess, never thinking that one day they might need to scale back or plan for the future. Financial advisors were often more interested in lining their pockets than looking out for the long-term well-being of their clients. The result was a life of financial instability that many of these stars never saw coming. Some of these musicians eventually found redemption, whether through therapy, rehab, or finding new outlets for their creativity. Others never fully recovered. The pain of losing their career, their fans, and their sense of self was too much to bear. They died far too young, consumed by the very things that had once made them famous. The reality is that many of these rock stars will forever be remembered for their tragic end, not just for the music they created. Their stories are a harsh reminder that fame can be fleeting. The moment they had been living for, the wild parties, the sold-out concerts, the admiration from fans, came to an abrupt end, leaving them to deal with the aftermath. And when the fame fades, what remains is a person who has to come to terms with their place in the world. For some of these rock legends, that was too much to handle. They had given everything to their music, but when the music stopped, they were left with nothing. The fall of these rock stars serves as a lesson to anyone who achieves fame. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of being on top, but it's equally important to prepare for the day when the spotlight dims. Fame doesn't last forever, and the choices made during the good times can have lasting consequences when the music stops. The true challenge is not living in the moment of fame, but in preparing for the future when the crowd stop cheering. For many of these 60s rock stars, their stories were never about the fame itself. It was about the legacy they left behind, the music they created, the memories they gave to millions of fans, and the lives they touched. Yet as much as we remember them for their music, we should also remember the lessons they teach us about the fragility of fame and the importance of being grounded in reality, no matter how high we rise. It's almost impossible to imagine the kind of emotional toll it must have taken on these 60s rock legends to go from ruling the world to facing such a harsh and unforgiving reality. For many, fame wasn't just a career, it was a dream that became their entire life. It was everything they had worked for, everything they believed in. But as they found out the hard way, fame is like a fleeting moment, and the fall from it can be more brutal than anyone ever expects. In the early years of their career, they lived like kings. Their every move was watched, every song they released was an instant hit, and their concerts were packed with adoring fans who couldn't get enough of them. Life seemed to move in a dreamlike rhythm: excitement, success, and love. But when that moment ended, many of these rock stars were left in a cold and confusing world that no longer cared about them the way it once did. The truth is, many of these stars had no idea how to handle the sudden loss of the world they had built. The fast-paced life of a rock star is all-consuming. You're constantly chasing the next big hit, the next concert, the next thrill. But when the music slows down, when the tours stop, and when the press moves on to the next big thing, you're left with an empty silence that can feel suffocating. For many, this was a crushing blow they didn't know how to recover from. Some tried to keep going. They thought that maybe, just maybe, they could recapture the magic of their early, but it wasn't that easy. The world had changed. The music industry was no longer the same, and neither were they. The magic that had once been so effortless was now hard to find. They tried to hold on to what little was left of their careers, but the effort was often in vain. Their audience had moved on, and the industry had no place for artists who had already seen their best days. The hardest part for many was the loneliness. Fame had surrounded them with people, managers, agents, friends, and fans, but when that fame faded, they were often left in isolation. It's hard to feel important when no one is looking at you anymore. The people who once fawned over you, the ones who promised to stand by you forever, are now nowhere to be found. Some of these stars ended up with nothing: no money, no friends, and no sense of purpose. It's hard to comprehend how quickly someone can go from being the center of attention to being completely forgotten. Financial struggles were for many another crushing part of their downfall. The lifestyle they had become accustomed to was expensive. Expensive homes, cars, parties, and endless indulgences, these things added up quickly. Unfortunately, the income they had once earned didn't last forever, and when their careers started to slow, they were left with enormous debts and a lack of financial resources to support the life they had created. Many of them had failed to plan for the future, trusting that their fame would continue indefinitely. But as they learned the hard way, nothing lasts forever. Some tried to get back on their feet. Some tried to find new ways to make money or make a comeback, but the music industry had already moved on. The audience had changed, and the industry was more focused on the next big star rather than holding on to those who had already had their time in the spotlight. It wasn't just the fans who had forgotten them, the industry itself had forgotten them too. Even though many of these rock stars had made huge contributions to music and culture, the industry is a harsh and unforgiving place. It's a world that rewards the new and the trendy, often forgetting those who have already made their mark. The sad reality is that many of these stars will be remembered for their tragic ends, not for the incredible impact they had on music during their heyday. They gave everything to their music, but when that music no longer ruled the airwaves, they were left with little more than fading memories. The most heartbreaking aspect of their stories is that they often died young. And in some cases, in poverty. They had so much to give, yet the world had moved on and they had no way to move with it. They died isolated, forgotten by many, with no one there to acknowledge the greatness they once had. These legends, who had once filled arenas with their music, were now nothing more than a distant memory for many. And yet, even though they faced such struggles in their later years, their legacy cannot be erased. The music they created continues to live on. The songs they wrote, the albums they released, and the performances they gave are still remembered by the fans who were lucky enough to experience them. It's a cruel twist of fate, though they may have been forgotten by the world, their music lives forever. Their stories also serve as a warning for today's stars, showing that fame, no matter how big, is not permanent. The entertainment industry is fast-moving and constantly evolving, and the people who are on top today can quickly find themselves replaced by someone younger, newer, and more popular. The key to surviving in such a world isn't just about living for the moment, it's about preparing for what happens when the spotlight fades. Unfortunately for many of these rock stars, it was too late to prepare for the inevitable decline. In the end, the lives of these rock stars are a complex mix of triumph and tragedy. They achieved greatness and changed the world with their music. But when the music stopped, they were left to face the harsh realities of a world that quickly moved on. Their fall from grace is a powerful reminder of the fragility of fame and the importance of being grounded in reality. While their music continues to inspire, their struggles serve as a cautionary tale for anyone who dreams of fame, reminding us that fame doesn't last forever, and neither does the wealth and success that come with it.